If you were an HR leader in 2025, your job wasn't really about managing human resources, was it? No, it was about managing pure chaos. So today, let's break down the perfect storm they all faced, and more importantly, figure out what lessons we can learn to build a workforce that's actually resilient.
Okay, so where did it all begin? Well, it really kicked off with the job cuts. And we're not talking about a small number here. By November of 2025, companies had announced over 1.17 million layoffs. Just let that number sink in. It was staggering, and it really set the tone for a year of just intense pressure.
And while all that was happening, you had this other crisis brewing. Employee engagement just fell off a cliff. Gallup reported a global rate of just 21%. I mean, that is the lowest it had been in a decade. It actually matched the all-time low we saw during the COVID-19 lockdowns. So yeah, people were not happy.
And then, just to complete this trifecta of trouble, a political bombshell dropped. A new proclamation suddenly introduced a $100,000 fee for new H-1B visas. You know, the very visas that companies rely on for skilled international talent. Overnight, global hiring strategies were just thrown into complete disarray.
So you've got these huge layoffs, rock-bottom morale, and a massive policy change. The crucial thing to understand here is that these weren't just separate, isolated events. No way. They were all interconnected forces. You had technology, politics, culture, all converging at once to create what you can only call a perfect storm for leaders and their teams.
All right, let's dive into the first major force of that storm, the sheer scale of the layoffs. We're calling this one the Great Workforce Contraction.
So what's the key takeaway from this chart? It's not just the number itself, it's the speed of the change. Those 1.17 million job cuts, that's a 54% increase over 2024. Think about that. It's a massive acceleration that pushed layoff levels right back up to post-pandemic highs. And this wasn't just happening in, one little corner of the economy. While the tech sector, sure, it kept shedding jobs, the government sector saw an almost unbelievable 672% spike in planned cuts. And for the first time ever, we saw a clear number of layoffs, we're talking nearly 55,000, being blamed directly on AI.
And if you want to understand the mindset behind some of these decisions, this quote from Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff just captures it perfectly. "I need less heads." It's brutal, right? But it's also a really stark reminder of the cost-cutting calculus that was driving so much of this contraction.
And here's what that mindset looked like in practice, right at Salesforce. As AI started to take over about half of their support work, their support team was slashed from 9,000 people down to just 5,000. It's a really clear, quantifiable example of this new technological reality hitting the bottom line.
So that brings us to the second major force in this storm. See, it wasn't just about the people who were leaving. It was about the morale of everyone who was left behind. It was a full-blown crisis of engagement.
So when you hear that 21% engagement number, what does it really mean? It means that nearly 8 out of every 10 employees were either just going through the motions or worse, actively disengaged from their work. This wasn't just a small dip, you guys. This was a return to the psychological low point we all felt during the 2020 lockdown. But here's the part that should really set off alarm bells: the disengagement of the managers themselves. We saw huge drops, especially among younger managers and female managers. And this is a massive risk, because the data is clear. Managers influence 70% of their team's engagement. So when your managers check out, their teams are right behind them.
And let's be clear, this isn't some soft, fuzzy feelings problem. This is a cold, hard economic disaster. The lost productivity from all this global disengagement, Gallup estimates it at nearly $9 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's about 9% of the entire global GDP. Wow.
Okay, so you've got all this turmoil, right? Layoffs, disengagement. You'd think leaders would be hyper-aware of what's happening on the ground. But the data reveals a third, and maybe the most dangerous element of this storm, a massive perception gap between executives and their employees.
Let's start with AI. Just look at this gap. It's huge. 87% of executives say they're using AI tools at work, but only 27% of their employees are. You see, this isn't a technology gap, it's a leadership blind spot. The people at the top are living in a completely different technological reality than their own workforce. And that gap, it completely warps their perception of reality. Executives believed that 76% of their people were enthusiastic about AI. The actual number? Only 31%.
I mean, according to Harvard Business Review, leaders were, and I quote, more than 2 times off the mark about what their own employees were actually thinking and feeling.
And this chart, this might be the most telling one of all. While a whopping 93% of executives said they felt psychologically safe at work, less than half of their workers felt the same way. This right here, this is the core of the disconnect. It's a fundamental difference in the actual lived experience of showing up to work every day.
Okay, so that was the storm. A huge workforce contraction, a crisis of engagement, and this profound leadership disconnect. So, now what? What are the lessons here? How do we actually move forward and build true workforce resilience? Well, the data from 2025 really points to 4 critical imperatives for leaders. First, you have to develop your managers. That's non-negotiable. It's the only way to tackle that engagement crisis. Second, you have to actively close that AI adoption gap we saw, and that means real support, not just telling people to use it. Third, and this is a big one, you have to rebuild the foundational trust that was just shattered by that huge perception gap. And finally, leaders have to stop thinking quarter to quarter and start planning for the long haul.
And that third point about rebuilding trust, it really all hinges on this concept, psychological safety. Remember that slide where 93% of execs felt safe, but less than half of workers did? This is the gap we have to close. It's the simple belief that you can speak up with ideas, questions, or concerns without fear of being punished. And the data is crystal clear. When you have it, retention for underrepresented groups literally quadruples. It's not a nice to have. It is a strategic necessity. Now, that fourth point, long-term planning, is just as critical. And yet, look at this. Only 12% of HR leaders are actually doing strategic workforce planning with a 3+ year focus. In a world where 40% of core skills could change by 2030, that kind of short-term thinking is basically just a recipe for getting caught in the very next storm.
So when you look back, the perfect storm of 2025 taught us that resilience isn't really about weathering one single event. It's about building the capacity to adapt constantly. The organizations that are going to thrive are the ones that take these lessons to heart. So the question for all of us is, the storm is past. What are we going to build from its lessons?
When people feel safe, organizations thrive. Safe space.